more. I am Kim Seabrook. You're watching the Good Looking News, and you know what I like to start off with? What's going on right here in New York, our city, our hometown. 9/11 is coming up, so I thought I'd start off with what's going on with that. There's a federal report where more people now believed to have died of 9/11 related illnesses than those lost in attacks. Thousands of lives were lost on September 11, 2001. But federal officials now believe more people have died of illnesses related to the terrorist attack than those killed on that day. The announcement was made in a victims' compensation report that was put out Tuesday by the Department of Justice. The report states it is also sobering to see that more people are now believed to have died of 9/11 related illnesses than were lost on September 11, 2001. It does not give a specific number, but first responders still suffering the effects of the day say that the terrorists are still doing damage even 20 years after the attack. Sawyer Set volunteer firefighter Court Cousins is one of those first responders who will be at Sloan Kettering until at least the end of the month. He is now on the receiving end of a stem cell transplant, but has dealt with a lot more from being on the scene of ground zero. 2 cancers I confronted. The first was chronic lymphomatic leukemia, and the other was a transformation of that to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Cousins says, and according to the report, the Victims' Compensation Fund has issued awards to over 40,000 individuals, totally nearly $9 billion thus far. Cousins says it's humbling that he's fighting for his life after working at ground zero for just 72 hours. And there are many people who were down there longer. Cousins says there are people who have been sicker and people who are maybe confronting their conditions with less of a support system that I may have been blessed to have. And yes, that's what's going on from, the 9/11 victims. But we do have another story, and our next story is still related to 9/11, but what happened with this one is 2 more victims of 9/11 World Trade Center attacks identified 20 years later. So next, in our next story, the New York City Office of Chief Medical Examiner announced on Tuesday that 2 new identifications of victims of September 11th attacks, just 2 days before the city marks 20 years since the tragedy. Dorothy Morgan of Hempstead is the 1,646th person, and a man whose name is being withheld at the request of his family is the 1,647th person to be identified through ongoing DNA analysis of unidentified remains recovered from the disaster that claimed the lives of 2,753 people 20 years ago. And we made a promise to the families of the World Trade Center, so the victims to do whatever it takes for as long as it takes to identify their loved ones. And with these 2 new identifications, we continue to fulfill that sacred obligation, said Dr. Barbara A. Sampson, Chief Medical Examiner of the City of New York. No matter how much time passes since September 11, 2001, we will never forget, and we pledge to use all the tools at our disposal to make sure all those who were lost can be reunited with their families. The identification of Dorothy Morgan was confirmed through DNA testing of remains recovered in 2001. The identification of the unnamed man was confirmed through DNA testing of remains recovered in 2001, 2002, and 2006. The 2 identifications are the first new identifications of the World Trade Center victims since October 2019. Some 1,106 victims, or 40% of those who died, remain unidentified. The ongoing effort to identify victims of the World Trade Center disaster is the largest and most complex forensic investigation in the history of the United States. And next, we're going to move on to our next story, which is New York City is using Biden stimulus to support taxi drivers, the homeless, and give artists $5,000 checks. New York City received more aid than any other city in the country from President Joe Biden's American Rescue Plan. It plans to allocate those stimulus funds to a range of areas, including giving some lucky artists $5,000 and working to end homelessness. Last week, New York City released a 70-page report detailing its plans to use the $5.9 billion in stimulus funds it received from Biden. Those plans include a program that provides $5,000 grants to 1,800 artists who suffered financially during the pandemic, a $65 million relief fund for taxi medallion owners, and a $125 million to support homeless people in the city, among other things. The report noted that these measures are just the beginning and that the city's top priority remains getting every resident vaccinated for COVID-19, and that the detailed plans only include those that are funded from Biden's stimulus. It is not intended to serve as a comprehensive report on the city's recovery efforts, the report says, but the city's decision to invest these funds now will help keep New Yorkers safe, restart the economy, rebuild the tax base, increase equity, and enable greater economic growth in future years. Other plans include $1.5 billion to increase employment and support small businesses, and $52.5 million to bring New York City's tourism back to pre-pandemic levels. Insider reported in March that after Biden signed his stimulus plan into law, of the $350 billion in state and local aid, $22.5 billion of it was divided evenly between all states and the District of Columbia, and the remaining funds were allocated based on unemployment numbers. So that meant that New York, along with California and Texas, were top of that list for that aid. But since states receive stimulus aid, a number of them have been slow to actually get the aid to residents who actually need it. For example, there was a report in July that while Biden set aside $50 billion to give to renters facing eviction during the pandemic, only 4% of that aid had actually gone out, because the distribution of that aid was under the control of the states. $8.5 billion for medical care in rural areas also has yet to be spent. And next we have New York City schools are starting to go back into effect in person. Catholic schools across New York City reopened today. It's back to school for Catholic school students across the 5 boroughs. So both the Archdiocese of New York and the Diocese of Brooklyn have several measures in place. So if we can move on to the next footage, one of many protocols being put in place to keep students safe is a mask mandate. No student will get through the school doors without one. Staff wants to install a sense of normalcy in the classrooms, even though this is yet another unusual year for children heading back to school. Officials are encouraging vaccinations, unfortunately, social distancing, and hand washing. On top of that, they will have rigorous cleaning and sanitizing of the facilities, including using air filtration systems. If a child is sick, parents are encouraged to keep them home until a doctor has cleared them to return to school. Catholic academies and parishes also plan to follow all rules when it comes to contact tracing. Families of the Catholic schools of New York received an email with a full opening plan. The Diocese of Brooklyn is happy that it was able to open on time for school last year, offering 5-day in-person learning, which it says boosted enrollment by 40%. And the Brooklyn Diocese says St. Thomas Aquinas is designated as a remote school, so any parent choosing to stay remote can actually go there. And next, we're going to move on. This is, you know what I love to talk about, good food, and especially in our environment. New York City moves to fix the supermarkets program fundamental flaw. The numbers were awful. Almost a quarter of New Yorkers were overweight, and 8 in every 100 were diabetic. In just 2 years, city residents put on 10 million pounds. The unsettling figures unearthed in a 2008 study by the Department of City Planning fingered real estate as a culprit. Too many New Yorkers lacked a supermarket. Now, while we do have supermarkets out here, not all of them provide healthy options. So around 3 million New Yorkers fell into high-need neighborhoods. The city's neologism, 4 food deserts and their cousins, food swamps where junk food overwhelms the good stuff. The shortage hit not only consumers' waistlines, but their wallets, as they had to spend more time and more money to get their food. The following year, the city responded with the food retail expansion to support health program. Fresh offered zoning and tax incentives to encourage developers to build more supermarkets in high-need neighborhoods. So de Blasio administration is now pushing to extend the zoning incentives to even more neighborhoods, but the program's results have been mixed at best. Few supermarkets have opened under the program, and most applications have been in Harlem and Bedford-Stuyvesant, leaving out vast areas of the city. 12 years and just 27 buildings have qualified for fresh zoning benefits, and only 8 are up and running. Of the 28 that received tax incentives, 22 are completed. And in the city, with 8.8 million stomachs, even supporters of the program believe it could be more doing. The number of supermarkets that have opened using fresh incentives is actually modest in comparison to the turnover of the retail food sector. Supermarkets open and close all the time in New York City, said Nevin Cohen, who is a research director of the CUNY Urban Food Policy Institute. But the city offers up to 20,000 extra residential square feet beyond a building zone's limit, 1 square foot of an apartment for every square foot of a supermarket. The City Planning Commission can allow an extra 15 feet of height to make room for the bonus space. An array of tax breaks sweeten for the deal. For 25 years, property taxes are frozen at pre-improvement amounts and land taxes are fully abated, which means both benefits begin phasing out after 21 years. Developers are also can skip paying city and state sales taxes on construction and renovation materials. One supermarket can make a huge difference for a neighborhood, said Cohen. A single store can decrease obesity rates, and access to fresh fruit and vegetables is crucial. But incentivizing grocery development has turned out to be a tricky business. Gentrification, rather than the city's initiative, appears to be driving developers' decisions. And what we're going to do, we're going to go into a quick commercial break. We will be right back on the Good Looking News, Millennium TV 24. Thank you so much.